Hey everyone, welcome back. Look, the last episode, or the last couple of episodes actually, have been pretty heavy because what we've been doing is just really highlighting just how serious this um, this effort by the Chinese government to really destroy Falun Gong around the world is, but it's also detrimental to you. And so, if you're watching this for the first time, go back to the last episodes, really have a good look through it, and just soak that information in. So, Louis and I would really like to get back to sharing with you more about what Falun Dafa has done in our lives. Um, all of my friends, generally, they ask me the question, what is this? Like, you know, uh, what is this Falun Gong? Is it, do you have to go to a temple, Mike? You tell us that you meditate, but is there a temple or what do you do, et cetera, et cetera? And it's really important for you guys to know naturally the ins and outs of how has Mike and Louis been benefited so much just by this man, Mr. Li Hongzhi's teaching of a Buddhist way? And why isn't Mike wearing robes and why isn't Louis off on the top of a snowy mountain with a yak meditating on it? You know? So I'm going to kick it off. And Louis and I are just going to bounce off each other for this because it is the greatest pleasure and the easiest thing in the world for us to share with you just some of the in and outs of how we got into the practice, what it's done for us, what we noticed, how it's changed our lives. So let me kick it off very quickly. I spent a lot of time in the personal training industry in Brisbane, Australia. And um, when I was about, I lived, I went and lived in Hong Kong for a year. I think I was about 25. I'm 53 now. I was about 25 years old. I went with a very good friend of mine, Steve. We were like brothers. And Steve had a very interesting thing in his life, third eye. The Chinese call it Tian. And so he grew up seeing all kinds of interdimensional things that are seen by people with third eye. You will have probably heard about it. I've met a few of them. You've probably met a few. Now, Steve and I became best mates, I think, about a year before we decided to travel. Still young, let's get out there and rock the world. And a good mate of mine was living in Hong Kong selling glass to those huge skyscrapers. And when Steve and I started traveling, we started having different experiences. And these experiences are fairly much experiences that I guess you could say people who um, practice spiritual paths get or attain or whatever word you want to use, levitation, mind reading. Steve and I were having blips of all kinds of stuff happening in China. I was working as a personal trainer in China for a year while we were there, and Steve was working as an events coordinator with one of the big Western event companies on Hong Kong Island. We lived in the territories at first, and then we moved to Hong Kong Island. And Steve and I took all of it pretty lightly, even though they were pretty cool things, I've got to say. But it let Steve and I know that, wow, there's some pretty big stuff going on in the world if this is what we're experiencing. But we never went and tried to join some kind of, levitation club or whatever. But we were experiencing different things. And we went from Hong Kong, then we lived in Spain, between Barcelona and France for about a year. That was awesome. And then we moved, we shipped ourselves back home. So that was about a 2-year period. When we got back, got back into our occupations. I started my own PT business again. Steve got back into painting, of all things, with his dad. And they, those months when we first got back, we were just getting ourselves back into the routine of living back in our own country. Steve had learned prosthetic artistry. Prosthetic artistry is, for example, when you're watching a movie, like an action movie, and someone gets their arm blown off, well, Steve's the guy on set that makes that happen. All the everything you see. And so Steve was getting back into that industry, a few months after being back home. And while he was on set, a guy called Gabriel, who was, I think, what was Gabe doing then? I think he was doing a bit of makeup and a bit of styling on set. And Gabe had been practicing Falun Gong in LA, where he lived previously. And when Gabe started practicing Falun Gong, like all of us, he started to see that his life could do with a few changes because he was following very much the LA craziness. And so Gabe moved back home, was working in the movies, and that's where Steve and Gabe met on site, hit it off like fantastically. And Gabe said to Steve, I've been practicing this amazing Buddhist practice from China. What I've just given you in just a few minutes has been how I came into contact with Falun Gong. And so, of course, Steve came home and he said to me, because I was a PT and Steve kind of put two and two together, health industry, Qigong. And he said to me, have you ever heard of Falun Dafa? In a beautiful Aussie accent. And I said, no. And he said, look, he told me the story and he said, I'm going to go out and do the exercises with Gabe because Gabriel just happened to live in New Farm, the same area that Steve and I lived at the time. And Steve said, I'm going to go out and do it. He said, Mike, there's something about this. And of course, like I said, Steve was a very perceptive and still is an incredibly perceptive man. And he said to me, there's something about this. I don't know what this Falun Dafa is, but I'm going to go do the exercises. So that weekend, he met with, he said it was like 70 people, all doing the Falun Gong exercises together. And he did them. I think I was working that day. It was a Saturday and I was training a few clients. Anyway, he got home and I said to him, how'd you go? And he said, I still don't know what this thing is, but it is amazing. His first impression just from doing the 5 exercises for the first time, for the very first time. And so what happened was, of course, I went with him the next weekend. And this is my experience. I turned up, fair enough. There were like, I think about 40 or 50 people on that weekend. And a lot of them were there to actually practice. They were people who practice Falun Gong. But there was a good sort of 5 to 10 of us that were there for the first time. And gosh, it might have even been Gabriel. From memory, I think it was Gabriel who taught us, helped us to see the movements. And so he put on the music that accompanies the exercises, and I did the exercises. Now, I remember it was about exercise 3, because there's 5 of them. About exercise 3, I just remember having this profound experience of like this realization that you're clear. My mind was so clear. Honestly, it felt like I could drop a pebble into it because it was a pond of clear water. And you just, you know what I mean? And I remember thinking to myself, this is not just some kind of meditation class. what I was feeling in my heart. Unexplainable, from just stretch, relax, you know, from these Qigong exercises, I knew it was something different and incredibly good. And the energy, I could, I honestly felt like there was a field around me. The energy was beaming. It was that the only word I can say is good. And then, so that was about exercise three. And then we did the sitting meditation, and I just felt that the whole time. But then when we finished the sitting meditation, oh gosh, it nearly brings me to tears, to be honest, because the to be 20 over 20 years into your practice and then look back and just think how simply it was all handed to you. It's incredible. One mate tells you, and then you're there, and then you're doing the exercises, and it's a beautiful thing. But anyway, I remember uncrossing my legs, because you sit in crossed legs when you're doing the fifth exercise, which is a seated meditation. And when I was standing up, honestly, it kind of felt like I was weightless. Like I was just like I didn't have to use my muscles at all. It was like my whole body just felt like it was standing up by itself. And then I'll stand back for this just so you can see. I was standing there, and I looked down at my feet for a few seconds, because my mind went, are your feet even touching the ground? God, I know it sounds ridiculous, and it does, but I'm giving you the real thought by thought experience of first doing the Falun Gong exercises. I looked down, I could see that my sneakers were touching the ground, but it felt like they weren't. And then I was speechless, to be honest. Not speechless in a way of awe, but speechless in a way that I was so calm that I just didn't even want to talk. It'd ruin it. It'd ruin it. And then I I remember, that's right, one of the Chinese practitioner's sons, he was only little, maybe 4 or 5. He walked up to me with a footy, like an Aussie rules footy. And he walked up, he said, "Will you kick the ball with me?" Yeah, of course I'll kick the ball with you. And I took it off him, and he ran. I think he knew what was about to happen, because this footy, I know this sounds strange, but everything I was experiencing was so beautiful that everything I touched, it had a special feeling. And I grabbed this footy and I kicked it so beautifully that it went for what looked like forever. And it just went straight past this kid's head. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, there is something so very special about what, because I'd already learned from Steve that it was Mr. Li Hongzhi. I'd learned a bit of history about him. There's something very special about what he's given to the world. And me kicking a footy really well certainly doesn't encapsulate it that well. But it was the feeling of doing these exercises for the first time. Now, I've heard many experiences, but I'll tell you for nothing that when I went home, both Steve and I were looking at each other like, wow, those exercises really are incredibly good. But my life was already very good. I was a young man living the dream, to be honest. I'd been bodybuilding for years. I felt really good about my health and my physique. I was in an industry that was one of the fastest growing industries probably on earth, the personal training industry. And I was always a very happy person. I wasn't searching for anything, especially a spiritual thing. I didn't even think about spirituality. So a week went by, and I wasn't going to New Farm Park. to go and do the exercises again. What I'm trying to say to you is that it's not some hypnotic thing, not at all. It's it's a genuine beauty that reaches your heart. So a week went by. I wasn't going back to do the exercises again. I wasn't like, oh, I've got to feel that all the time. Not at all. What happened was Gabe rung Steve. Steve and I and our girlfriends at the time were heading to dinner with a few of our other friends. Steve invited Gabe to come with us because he'd really become a friend. If there's one thing that'll happen, and I've heard this many times, when you meet a Falun Gong practitioner, you know it because they're such nice people. And that's what the practice does. It really enhances the very best things in you, and it can really help you to minimize some of the things in us that aren't real great. And so anyway, um, Gabe came with us to dinner. Gabe and I are sitting next to each other, and we're having a bit of a chat about that day at the exercises. And Gabe says to me, and he's a Greek man, big beard Greek man, and he says to me, "What did you think about Zhuan Falun, the main text, the teaching of Falun Gong?" And I said, "What's that?" And Gabe just sat up in his chair like this, rolled his eyes like, "I can't believe you haven't even started reading the book yet." And he reached down into his duffel bag and he pulled it straight out of his own duffel bag and he handed it to me. And I remember at the time, you got to remember, I was just a big muscle head, never read anything. My whole life revolved around muscles and, pumping up at the gym and going to the beach. And I just reached over and grabbed this book. I was like, okay. And Gabe just said to me, "You keep it until you don't need it." And myself and my girlfriend, Natalie, went home and we had this big, beautiful day lounge, this carved wood day lounge. And I sat down on that thing and I just opened up the preface and started reading it. I was there for about 3 hours. It was nearly midnight by the time I lifted my head again. And again, everyone, I'm not a spiritual person. I never seek spirituality. My mum used to go and do that stuff, but she was a bit of a hippie as well. And everything that Mr. Li Hongzhi was talking about made sense. Even some of the things that I read and I thought, wow, okay, that's really big. What you've just said is really big. But I knew that it made sense anyway. Something inside my heart really said to me, this is all really good stuff. And I remember looking up after all that time, and the one thought on my mind, folks, was, I can do this. I'd only read a quarter of the book. I'm a very slow reader. But I already knew this is something I can do because I already knew that what Li Hongzhi had given was something that anyone could do anywhere. I didn't need to go to a temple. I didn't need to become a monk. I didn't need to shave my head. I didn't need to give money. I didn't need to do anything. I just needed to start to cultivate my heart and become a better person. And he was illustrating all the whys and hows that true spiritual cultivation has had forever. And it all made sense. So that's a very short, skinny version of how I became a practitioner. Now, Louis, I realize I've set probably a medium to low bar. So please give us your accounts and what comes out of your heart.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. um, yeah, when I first did the exercises, it was I was just in my home, in my house. I was trying to learn them off the video that is on the falundafa.org website. Li Hongzhi has the instructions up there. Um, yeah, it's probably not as vivid as it should be, but I've had some very wonderful experiences doing the exercise, very peaceful states of mind. And um, one great thing was being able to connect with the local community and kind of correct what I may have done wrong trying to teach myself on the internet. um, and that's where it really kind of opened up for me, like getting more benefit from practicing the exercises. Um, and yeah, like Michael says, it doesn't feel like an ordinary kind of meditation. Not all the time, and every time it can be different. Sometimes you're really working through something, and there's a lot of pain in your legs. Really
That's what I
forbear.
haven't shared with you guys.
um, which is also like a really good thing as well. Like you might think, what do you mean? You're in so much pain, but no, it's it's not just about the meditation, it's also about the mind and strengthening your character. So um, sometimes there's really painful meditations that seems like it's will never end. You can get to a state of mind where you're kind of at ease with the pain, but also not just the pain, but what's going on in your head, and that's almost even more profound than a yeah than a really beautiful experience. Not to take away from that either. That's really special as well. Um, yeah, and I started with reading Zhuan Falun first. I was never big on exercise, like, or I did a little bit of meditation, for sure, but never as a proper practice. And so, yeah, it's for me reading the book has been very, very amazing. But it puts a lot of things you've like kind of experienced it throughout your life, kind of puts them together, and um, it kind of gives you a very clear and full picture of the way the world kind of operates on a spiritual level. At least that's how I feel. Um, and for me, that helps orientate myself to in a better direction. Um, sometimes you have bad days, but and sometimes you kind of forget what you've read about, and it, it's it's not not it's not so clear in that moment. But then you realize later on, it's like, oh, okay, and then
I really
you
stuffed
go
that
through that.
up.
Yeah, you kind of go through that process and reflect on yourself, and it's like a moving in a positive direction. Yeah,
And it really is
yeah,
like that, there are, and this will double back a little. Okay, let's double back a little on something. Louis and I have talked in the previous episodes about the way the Chinese government has made all kinds of twisted comments about Falun Gong, and that really that really is a very easy thing to do with anything spiritual. I hate to say that, but it's true because a spiritual thing, like Louis was really alluding to then, it's not all like I've heard before, lying on couches and eating honey. You don't just find yourself in a literally greater peace of mind on a constant basis without any work. You've got to do the work of the heart. You've and the work of the heart happens every single day, every moment. I'll give you a perfect example. I've already told everyone, I was a PT, I've been in bodybuilding for years, but I didn't tell you that, I've also been a bouncer and I've also done a fair bit of martial arts training and yada, yada, yada. But that was a very small part of my life. But having said that, there are certain things that had happened in my life when I was younger that you know, a bloke gets in a fight occasionally, and you tend to, lash out with these things. But one of the things that has been most profound in my life is to genuinely understand why to be tolerant. It's one thing to be told to be tolerant. And all of us can think, oh yeah, of course, you should be fairly tolerant from one degree to another. But what we all do is take that and we just gauge it to wherever our personality wants it to be. I'm tolerant right up until you tick me off, and then I'm going to punch you right in the nose. That kind of thing. And I'd been practicing for years. And I when I started with Falun Gong, I'd shared with all of you that that's when I got into humanitarians work, because I wanted to give back to the world. Actually, I wanted to give back to my neighbor, let alone the people all around the world. And so um, I had let go of the fitness industry. And at one point, I was actually doing humanitarians work for nothing. I had At one stage, I was working in the steel industry in a steel parts warehouse, managing the warehouse. I'd made quite a little lump savings, and so I went off and did humanitarians work, just humanitarians work, and just lived off my savings. That was actually in Melbourne. One of the associations I worked with was the Tibet Association with Alex in Melbourne. It was amazing. Anyway, and at a later stage, I wound up being a cleaner in a shopping centre. I can tell you there's not much I haven't done. I've had so many different jobs over my life. And there was, by this time, I'd practiced for quite a while, maybe, I don't know, 7 years or something. And there was a guy who was the son of one of the shop owners, of one of the cafe owners, who just couldn't stand me. Now, I'm not going to tell you all the ins and outs. Maybe we'll do that on another show. But basically, of course, by this time, I treated everyone, even people who may not have liked me, really well, because Falun Dafa teaches you really, really, really the important nature of all of our relations with people. It really teaches you. Li Hongzhi goes to great strains to talk about it in all kinds of spiritual ways, scientific ways, and really help paint a picture of just how beautiful we all are together. And this guy behind my back, and by the way, I was a really good cleaner. Like, the place was sparkling. And the guy, when he found out who my boss was, who was a man called Paul Angel, who runs a great services company in Melbourne, when he found out, he waited till Paul came to see me and then went out and saw Paul and complained about me, saying that, the place really wasn't clean. Probably only when I was here, I was getting it cleaned properly. Basically tried to get me fired. And Paul came to find me and we had coffee. And he said to me, "Do you know Jimmy?" The guy who's in at the cafe. I said, yeah, I know him well. He said, "Well, Jimmy just came up and told me just what I told you." And I said to him, "Look, take it lightly, because for whatever reason, Jimmy can't stand me. He really can't stand me." And I'd say he might have just been trying to get me fired. And Paul said to me, "Well, that's wrong. That's just dead wrong. What do you want to do about it?" So I'm sitting there with my boss, who's saying to me, "Let's get back at this guy," basically, because Paul was Greek as well. So he believed in all sorts of things, obviously. But and I said, no, just leave it. Just leave it. And he said to me, because I was still pretty big at this stage, I haven't trained for forever and a day, but I was still pretty big at this stage. And he said to me, "Well, don't kill him. I said, no. I said, Paul, you know I practice Falun Gong. He said, I know, but the guys just literally tried to get you fired. And I said, it's okay. You know that this place runs like clockwork. So anyway, I never said a word about it to anyone or to Jimmy. I can tell you for nothing that later on, Jimmy and I actually became really good friends. And because of the teachings of Falun Dafa and just the massive picture that Mr. Li Hongzhi paints spiritually to help us understand why it's so important to have our spiritual element intact and aware, I was able to take something that offensive and take it lightly to the point where I had no need to even talk about it with anyone, and be able to just let it go. That's one of the things I think therapists must say to squillions of people around the world every day. You have to learn to let it go. Well, in a funny way, that's one of the things Falun Dafa has done in my life. And I can tell you just that one principle, and there's so many that are taught in Falun Dafa, that one principle has helped me become the father, the good father of a very good boy, bringing up a good boy and a good husband to a beautiful, good wife. Just that one principle in Falun Dafa. So that allows, I guess, from this little person to you, an understanding of just how broad and big and beautiful the teaching of Falun Dafa is, and why, when people start to practice, they actually live the profound nature of its teaching every day. And like Louis said, there are days where I stuff that up. I'm only sharing with you one of the very good, profound experiences I've had. But of course, there are days where Sebastian will tick me off in some particular way that I haven't really seen and gotten a grip on yet. And I'll yell at him as a father, and he'll cower in the corner. But those things, those elements become less and less. The relationship with these two beautiful people who are my son and my wife has blossomed over 17 years. And it's because of the practice. And many of the people, many of my friends that I know who are divorced, I can tell you when they share with me the reasons for their divorce, it breaks my heart because I think, you know, that's really just nothing. That's really just nothing. And you two have taken it and you haven't even looked at it properly. I'm not saying looked at it from Falun Gong. What Falun Gong teaches is immensely profound, but also very simple at the same time. I'm talking about the way that we as people have just become so intolerant of each other, or we feel like this one life that we've got, if we're not getting absolutely everything we want from our relationship in our dreams, it's not worth it. Holy moly, that's really off key. And so, you know, as a Falun Gong practitioner, I've watched in my life with the health of my body, the health of my heart and mind, the health of my family, including my extended family, like Louis was sharing on our first episode, okay? You radiate to everyone and they see the differences in you because the practice is so powerful. And you just, yeah, you make big differences around you. And so, you know, that's why, that's another reason why in another episode I shared, you know, Louis and I were sharing, you might think we're afraid because this ridiculous CCP is trying to destroy things, but we're not, because the spiritual nature of the teaching of Falun Gong helps you understand that your life is just so big and beautiful. If we all understood even a tiny fraction of what Mr. Li Hongzhi is teaching, it'd make a big difference, even just a tiny fraction, let alone what the whole teaching gives you as a person. So, yeah. So, anyway, once again, I've yabbered on for ages. I better I'd better hand it back over to Louis. Sorry, bro.
No,
Anyway,
no, it's really special.
actually, Louis, you've made me think. When you spoke about the depression part,
Mm,
you said something really profound, Bud, because when you said as you were reading, you could feel it changing things in you. You could feel everything inside of you. That's
mm.
something I've experienced as well, but nowhere near to what when you shared that. That's big stuff. Can you share more about that with us? I know it's a inside of us we feel it like it's nothing, but it's really not nothing. It's a big thing.
Yeah,
Can you
sure.
share more around that?
Yeah, I think when we live in this world, we develop different ways of thinking about things, and particularly about ourselves. So I think for me, it was, and even to this day, sometimes you have a lot of negative thoughts about yourself and different perceptions or beliefs. And anytime I read Zhuan Falun and I've developed a kind of incorrect way of thinking about something, it doesn't even have to be about me, but about anything. It whether it's not even necessarily in the words itself, but the whole message and the truth behind the teaching is kind of lets your mind let go of the kind of that, I guess you could say, toxic kind of way of thinking,
It's a
and
good word for it because that's
kind
what it's
of
become.
yeah, like elevate your mind to this kind of more compassionate, like wholesome perspective. And that's what's happened to me when definitely when I first read it, but every subsequent time I read the book, it's always it's like that. Um, it's and that kind of helps me, take that truth and that helpful energy, that helpful understanding into the world, and try and take things more lightly and be more kind, or not complain so much about whatever it is. And yeah, but in the case for depression, like it's a lot of people are suffering a lot from that kind of thing. And I'm not saying this is the cure for everyone, but for me, it definitely it puts it into context and helped me let go, as Michael said, of a lot of kind of beliefs I had or thoughts about myself. Yeah. Mm.
And it's not just like this is there's so many things going on in our world. We've got marriages not being able to stay together, workplaces in chaos because really we've become less focused on our work, the importance of our work, and being diligent with what we do at our work. I run a business. Uh, Louis works actually for the kind of business that I run. Um, all the elements of our relationships between us and our children, us and our husbands and wives, our fathers and mothers, so many relationships have become really, really dilute. Like the fabric of our relationships together just seems to be pulling apart. And then on top of that, you talk about the bad things that we do to each other. There's probably a few of you watching now that you've gone through some awful stuff, awful, awful stuff that people, how could people still do that? Or how could people do that to another human being? You might have gone through those things. Now, there is so much of that around. And I can tell you that what Louis and I are saying to you straight to your faces are, we're not imbeciles, neither of us. But also, neither of us are some people looking for some sort of solution to something, desperately seeking. We're neither. But both of our experiences, just with practicing Falun Gong, have been life changing in the most positive ways you can imagine. Now, I've got my beautiful family, talking about them, just coming in with dinner. So we'll have to wrap this up for this episode. But everything that Louis and I talk about in the DAFA discussions, videos with you guys, all of it is very real and raw. It's straight from the heart. You can tell, like I've said in the first episode, there's no scripts. We really hope that you'll stay with us, learn more. Whether you want to practice Falun Gong or not, to be honest, isn't particularly important to me. The main thing on my part of this is for you to understand that it's a good thing, because there's that entity out there, the Chinese Communist Party, that is doing what it does, is doing and ramping it up. So we, Louis and I, and all of the practitioners around the world want you to know the truth about it so you can make good decisions. And I hear that in movies now, make good decisions, make good decisions. Well, we're hoping you'll make a good one on this one. And look into it for yourself. As you know now, there's so much misinformation out there from the CCP, but I think after watching us, you might just see it clearly for what it is now, because we've elaborated on enough for you to achieve it. Oh, I can smell the pizza. So we're going to have to wrap it up.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
See you guys. Bye.
Thank you, Louis. All of you, have a fantastic night. See you.